Glennon Doyle tells this story in her TEDx talk called "Everything I Know I Learned in a Mental Hospital." A former addict and bulimic, Glennon describes college as a haze of binging and purging in the morning and booze and drugs in the evening. And she says this: "I hated the sunrise. I closed the blinds and I put the pillow over my head when my spinning brain would torture me about the people who were going out into their day, into the light to make relationships and pursue their dreams and have a day. And I had no day. I had only night. And these days, I like to think of hope as that sunrise. It comes out every single day to shine on everybody equally. It comes out to shine on the sinners and the saints and the druggies and the cheerleaders. It never withholds. It doesn't judge. And if you spend your entire life in the dark and then one day just decide to come out, I'll be there waiting for you, just waiting to warm you." All those years I thought of that sunrise as searching and accusatory and judgmental. But it wasn't. It was just hope's daily invitation to come back to life. And I think if you still have a day, if you're still alive, you are invited. So, beloved, it is 2018. And our job this year and every year is to accept hope's daily invitation to come back to life. Amen? And to hold out that invitation to others. Because it is very dark. This country is dark. It's fearful and anxious and often ugly. There's saber rattling daily about nuclear war, and hatred and killing seem to feed our daily diet of what the world we inhabit is really like. And no matter what political party we associate with, we know that we have a contempt problem fueled by separation and alienation. It is very dark. And here in our congregation, so many of our beloveds have been recently diagnosed with cancer, have terminal illness, are struggling in crumbling marriages, are mired in substance abuse, are unemployed or underemployed, are scared of what the future holds, and we are all mourning deep loss. And many of us have lost hope, or at least some hope. So this time of darkness is the best time to celebrate the festival of Epiphany, because Jesus was born to be a light of the world in a time of terrible darkness. The story of Epiphany goes like this. You all know it. King Herod heard tell of a baby born in Bethlehem who was to be the king of the Jews. And Herod erupted into a raging, vengeful, murderous jealousy. No one could be king but him. So he called on his constituents, 3 wise men, to follow the star to where this tiny baby lay, sleeping in heavenly peace. He wanted these guys to reveal this powerful baby's location so that Herod could destroy him. And the wise men set out. They set out to follow a star, the brightest star they had ever seen, out of their darkness, journeying for days with no map, with no direction, not stopping to rest, not even knowing the final destination. They simply relied on the wisdom to know that the journey would lead them to a new understanding, new knowledge, new hope. And they just kept doing the next right thing until they got to Bethlehem. The wise men do, in fact, find the baby, and they offer him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. There's a joke that goes, if the wise men were wise women, they would have brought practical gifts, like diapers and wipes, and maybe one of those vibrating bassinets that plays lullabies, and they would have also brought a casserole and Laniso cream and cleaned up the stable for Mary. But the wise men brought in practical presents because they were gifts fit for a king, fit for God. The wise men have a dream that night that spooks them enough that they don't go back to Herod to tell him where the child is. And Joseph has a dream as well, telling him it's a good idea to move his little family off to Egypt to protect them, and so he does. And when Herod finds out that he has been tricked by those wise men, he goes into a rage. Like the jealous, thin-skinned, easily threatened, narcissistic, impulsive leader that he is, he retaliates by killing all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under. That's right, Herod is so spiteful, thin-skinned, and easily provoked that he kills all the young children in Bethlehem, all in response to his fear of a little baby who challenges his leadership. The parents of Bethlehem are inconsolable, of course. The weeping is deafening. You can hear it throughout the countryside, wailing and loud lamentation. This is the world, the darkness that Jesus is born into. The Epiphany story is the story of a tiny baby boy shining God's light of truth into the darkness of empire, into the darkness of great sorrow, into the darkness of terror. It is the story of a journey to follow this light to a destination unknown. It is a story of becoming wise, an invitation to hope's promise. And my favorite stories are Epiphany stories. My favorite stories include heroes like you and me who decide to accept the invitation to hope that the sunrise offers us every morning. My favorite protagonists take the journey out of the safety of darkness, not knowing where they will end up. And so my new personal hero, besides all of you, is Christian Picciolini. Have you all heard of him before? His name is fun to say, Picciolini. Say it with me, Picciolini. Yes, like this. I want to tell you his Epiphany story. I was introduced to him last week on Sarah Silverman's show, I Love You, America. Have any of you seen parts of that? Yeah. He recently wrote a book, and it's called White American Youth, My Descent into America's Most Violent Hate Group and How I Got Out. And after I saw his beautiful interview with Silverman, I watched his TED Talk and then a 60-minute show dedicated to him and the black man who forgave him. And I wept openly watching all three, which I rarely do. So Christian Picciolini's story begins as a young child growing up in Chicago with Italian immigrants for parents. He came from a good family, he says. But as recent immigrants to America, his parents had to work all the time. They had 2 jobs each just to make ends meet and feed their family, and Christian was alone a lot, and he was feeling emotionally neglected pretty much all the time. And as a young middle schooler, he was small and he was bullied and he didn't fit in at school and he generally just didn't have a place to belong. He was angry. And one day, at age 14, he was smoking a joint in an alley, and a man twice his age came up to him, took the joint out of his mouth, and told him, "You know, the Jews and communists want you to smoke this to make you docile." Christian admits now that he didn't know any Jewish people at the time and that the only communist he had heard of was the antagonist in his favorite Rocky movie. He also admits now that he had no idea what the word docile even meant. Nevertheless, that man gave him an identity, a purpose, a place to channel his rage, and most importantly, a place to belong that day. Within a week, Christian had joined the most notorious and deadly white supremacist group in the nation. He rose up as one of the biggest leaders in the movement very quickly, starting a white power punk rock band and touring the world and recruiting young, vulnerable white boys into the community. As a teenager, Christian was expelled from his high school 6 times. He was very violent, and 3 of those times were for beating up the same black classmate. He was finally kicked out of his high school for good after calling the African-American principal horrific racial slurs, threatening the lynching of all the black people in Chicago, and trying to start a fight with the African-American head of security at the school. He was restrained by that same man and later arrested. A high school dropout and a skinhead, Christian got married young at age 19, and soon after had 2 young boys. So at 21, his hard shell was cracked open a little bit, and a tiny ray of light shone in his darkness. Little babies have the power to topple hate and empire. That's the Christmas story, after all. They have the power to save the world. Christian started to ask himself who he really was, a white supremacist or a husband and a father. He started to have a new sense of allegiance and belonging and an identity to the young family that he had given life to. He left the streets in those years to protect his family, but he still didn't leave the movement. Instead, Christian opened a record store to sell his white power music, the only true business that he ever knew. People would come from all over the country to buy it. He knew, though, that if he only sold white supremacist music, the community would see him as a threat and shut his business down. So he also sold some hip hop and punk rock and other genres. And as a result of this diverse array of music his store sold, Christian began to meet and form relationships with people in the communities that he had long purported to hate. One day, a black man about his age came into his store, and he was noticeably shaken and tearful, and so Christian decided to ask him what was wrong. And he found out that the man's mother had breast cancer, and Christian immediately felt compassion and kinship for this man because Christian's mother was also recently diagnosed with breast cancer. Another week, a gay couple came in, and Christian watched them tenderly care for their little boy. And he had a sudden realization that this couple loved their little boy just as much as he loved his own children. And he related to them instantly. Another week, he met and talked with recent immigrants. Their story reminded him of his own parents' immigration story and how hard they had to work just to survive and take care of him. And suddenly, instead of hating immigrants for taking jobs, he remembered that he, too, was the son of hard-working immigrants. Christian slowly began to see more in common with the people he once hated than the hate group he associated himself with. He began to be embarrassed about the primary source of his income now that he made these new connections. And so he closed the store, and as a result, lost everything that he had worked for. However, he didn't denounce the white power movement entirely. They had been his family for too long, so his own biological family left him. He was depressed and lost. Eventually, a friend got him a new job installing IBM computers. And one day, Christian had to go to his old high school to install a computer. Terrified to confront his past, Christian saw the African-American head of security that he fought with years before, who still worked there. Christian followed the man into the parking lot and tapped him on the shoulder, and the man turned around and stepped back in fear, recognizing him. Christian couldn't think of what to say, and so there was silence for a moment, and finally, he stammered out, "I'm sorry." And the man moved forward to embrace him. "I forgive you," the man said, "but I ask that you do one thing. Go out and tell your story to everyone who will listen." That day changed Christian's life forever. He says, "I received compassion from the people I deserved it least from when I least deserved it, and that helped change me." Christian has now counseled over 100 people out of the white supremacy movement through his organization called Life After Hate. He speaks in prisons and in schools. He wrote a book about his journey about the spread and psychology of hate groups. He shines light every day into the darkness of hate and illuminates it. And he does it with love. When Christian meets with young white supremacists, he doesn't try to convince them that they are wrong or bad. He just listens. He listens with compassion. He listens for their potholes in their life, and he fills them. He listens for alienation, and he finds them community. He listens for anger and hopelessness and loneliness, and he offers them hope and connection. He helps them get job skills, tattoo removal, counseling, and self-esteem building. And he doesn't stop there. He brings them to meet people that they purport to hate. He says that hate comes from fear of the unknown. It is almost impossible to hate people when you know their story. In our scripture from Isaiah, the glory of God shines upon the nation's darkness, and the nation reflects God's light like a mirror. The light of God shines upon them, and they arise, and they become a light for others. Christian Picciolini allowed light to pierce the darkness of his hate. He followed the light, though it meant leaving the safety of his community and his way of life. He just kept doing the next right thing until he made it all the way to Bethlehem to kneel down before the Christ child and offer his gifts for a human divine king. Christian, acting as a mirror to reflect the light, asks others to do the same. He challenges his audience to find the people who least deserve our compassion and give it to them. Impractical gifts that may just be fit for God. So, beloved Epiphany people, Christian's task is our task. We must let the light of God pierce our own deepest darkness. We must follow the light, though we do not know the path and have no map to follow. We must do the next right thing until we reach the Christ child. We must offer our impractical gifts fit for God. We must accept hope's daily invitation to come back to life. If you still have a day, if you're still alive, you're still invited. Find someone who doesn't deserve our compassion and give it to them. Arise, shine, for your light has come. Lift up your eyes and look around. The glory of the Lord has shone upon you and risen in you. Happy New Year, and amen.